When I first saw it, my breath was stolen. It stood there, resplendent in its silence, just daring me to come closer. I remember receiving a mixture of fear and fascination. Fear because I didn't know who it belonged to, and fascination due to the immaculate beauty this object radiated. It's been close to a year since I crossed its path. Being 17 at the time and easily swayed by my peers, I was part of most mischief in my community, from graffiti to the occasional theft. Anything unfortunate that happened around my town, my friends and I were always the first to point fingers to. Now, although we were pretty reluctant to admit to the crimes, if some or all of us were caught red-handed, we'd all own up to it. A little over a year ago, my group decided to outdo ourselves once more, and we stole an ice cream truck. It was late, the sun was far in the distance, and no one was around for miles. The lot was fenced with a lock, but it was no match for a crowbar. I should explain a few things about my group of friends. Even though you may look at us as criminals, we all had our own very unique skills. For instance, one guy could smooth talk his way out of anything. He could sell ice to an Eskimo, so to speak. I did find it quite peculiar that he would speak on his behalf whenever we got caught, and the townspeople would just turn a blind eye to him, but he would still stand next to us to receive the punishment. Another member could drive any type of vehicle, semi-truck to bulldozer. That's another funny story. If he got behind the wheel, he'd make it move, which usually involved hot wiring. He was actually a very good driver unless we didn't want him to be, if you catch my drift. One guy had a very interesting skill, similar to mine. He had really good eyesight, and could even see in the dark, and he had a knack for knowing which building had something valuable inside, worth stealing. For example, we'd be driving around and he would just point to a building off in the distance. We joked that he was psychic, but he was right every single time. I said it was similar to my skill in a way. My skill is, wherever I go, I always find the most valuable thing in the entire building. I know some of you would just say, that's the job of a thief, or it's not hard to use your eyes. But it's more than that. One time, we broke into this random house, and while some of us were rooting around, I leaned against a desk. Nonchalantly opening a drawer, I found a diamond-encrusted necklace with a golden pendant. A different time, we entered a residence whose family was on vacation. I was drawn to the house's study, and like clockwork, the first thing I picked up happened to be a 2,000-year-old Roman coin. I pawned it for $5,000 at a shop outside the town's limit. Back to the ice cream truck incident. We broke into the lot, and our friends started the truck right up. We rode around for most of the night eating ice cream and speeding down local streets. As the night was drawing to a close and the sky was growing lighter, we took a turn down a residential dead end. We all knew this dead end because the road ended before a small lake we all liked to swim at in the summer. Once the truck was at 60 miles per hour, the cheeky bastard turned to us and said, "You guys like floats?" before turning on the music and launching us into the chilling water. The last thing I remember doing was face-palming and ending up at court the next day. Standing before a judge, our driver still laughing about the pun he made, was the only thing breaking the crushing silence. After reviewing our case, the judge wanted to try us all as adults and send us each to prison for a very long time. That would have been the judgment if not for our master of speech. I still, to this day, don't know how he did it. But he sweet-talked, lied, conned, and bent the truth, managing to get us released with like 100 days of community service. Some of us felt invincible, but the smooth talker and I realized that we were so lucky to be out there that we could hardly believe it. After our 100 days of cleaning up the road and giving back to our community, we were finally released. For the first month or so, I didn't hang out with those guys, but it wasn't long after that I received a knock at my window. I tried to argue with the guys that I didn't want to press my luck anymore, that I was done with all this stuff. Of course, I was ridiculed and pressured into coming outside. Initially, I wasn't going to go outside, but what they told me piqued my interests. That the large house on the outskirts of town is finally vacant, and that our psychic friend was 100% positive that there was something valuable in those walls. Although my desire to stay out of prison weighed heavy in my mind, the thought of an easy payday was heavier. Grabbing a few things and climbing out of the window, we were well on our way to the old house. The home itself was astonishing. A 3-story home which had to be at least 100 years old towered on the horizon. We parked next to a nearby tree and slowly approached the side of the house. Peering in through a window, we noticed that the house was actually still semi-furnished. Not taking chances, we scoured the outside for a way in. Finally, locating a window that had a worn latch, we managed to force it open without destroying the window itself. Once we were inside, the boys spread out, a couple heading up the stairs and another searching around the living room. I patiently waited by the window, putting all my faith in my unique gift. That's when I turned my head and noticed a white door which seemed slightly out of place. Heading over to it and pulling it open, it revealed darkened steps that descended into nothingness. With flashlight in hand, I walked the steps that seemed to go on forever. Upon reaching the bottom, I was met with the smell of dust and mold. But as I scanned the light around the room, through the stacked boxes and old furniture, there it was. Pushing my way through some of the boxes, I finally stood before it. The grandest piano I had ever seen. I don't know how to really explain it, but to me, it almost felt like the piano was staring at me, silently judging me. With the light from the flashlight dancing over it, the instrument was stunning, the blackened wood containing a red hue, the keys polished to perfection. Finally, the battle between fear and fascination shifted. My hand rested upon the keys. I was utterly captivated by this beautiful instrument. Although I was never musically inclined, I was just amazed at what I had found. It wasn't long before I was broken from my trance by the guys upstairs, shouting at me to come back up. Slowly backing away and running up the stairs, I was greeted by our friendly neighborhood car thief, brandishing a dusty old necklace. He was kind of rubbing it in my face. I really didn't have the heart to tell him it wasn't real. They asked me what I managed to find, and I told them nothing. The mocking ensued after that, as we headed back to the car. That I was losing my touch, that our car thief was the new golden child, etc. But what they failed to realize is that I had found the most valuable thing in my entire life. The next day I got up and rode my bike to the old house, bringing some battery-powered lamps and a few cleaning supplies. I entered the house and headed to the basement. After a few hours of cleaning and rearranging some things, the basement was spotless. Even though the basement windows were small, after a good cleaning they let in a good amount of light into the dreary confines. It wasn't until the sun started to fall from the sky that I sat upon the bench. After striking that first key, the sensation that coursed through my body was insane. It felt like power. You ever get in a car and push it to the red? That's exactly what it felt like. Now, like I said before, I'm not musically inclined. I can't read music, nor do I know anything about pianos. So I just started to improvise, striking keys at random. Though I expected senseless noise to emanate, what I heard was unbelievable. The most beautiful sounds were exploding from my fingertips. I was in awe at what I was doing, knowing full well that I was not actually creating the sounds, but the piano was. Each note played from my hands came together to form an intoxicating display of sounds. Before I knew it, the sun was already starting to rise as the rays began to peek through the windows. What was strange to me was that I didn't even feel tired, but I knew I should probably head back home and get some rest anyway. After a few weeks of heading there and playing the piano, I stumbled upon a bunch of trucks parked outside the old house. Riding up to the movers, I asked them what they were doing. I was almost appalled at seeing strangers messing around with my secret hideout. A man stood outside watching the movers carrying boxes and furniture from the trucks. I asked him who he was, and he told me that he and his family had just bought the house. Worried that I was going to lose my prize, I quickly thought up a story and told the man that the previous owner had taught me to play the piano, and that he wanted me to have it when he died. The man laughed at my plea to get the piano and denied my request. That's when I offered to pay him for it. Without batting an eye, I pulled out the $5,000 I had received from that previous heist and offered it while begging tearfully. It appeared as if I was putting on a good show, but to be honest, I wasn't faking it. I truly felt my heart start to break when he first rejected me. After seeing the pain in my eyes, the man finally caved, saying if it meant that much to me, I can have it. He even had the movers pull it out of that dark basement for me, and offered to use some of that money to take it wherever I needed to go. Before the movers loaded it onto the truck, he asked me to play it for him, just to make sure I wasn't lying about the story. I felt a lump grow in my throat, and paused as he stood there, arms crossed, with the movers resting behind him. The sly grin on his face seemed to stem from a hunch that he had that I was completely lying. Looking at the piano, which was bathed in sunlight, I felt butterflies in my stomach. Sitting upon that bench and swallowing hard, I looked once more at the man. Then I started to play. My fingers nimbly danced across the keys, and about halfway through, I happened to look up at the man, and his jaw was touching the ground. The movers were all captivated as well, just sitting and listening to the entrancing music that I was producing. Finishing, the man approached me slowly and handed me the $5,000. To be honest, I was quite shocked, but I didn't argue. I asked the movers to take the piano to my garage, which was used more for storage rather than cars. My parents questioned me as to how I came to own this piano, but were quickly silenced as I played for them. Over the weeks and months that followed, I started hosting concerts just outside my garage. Soon, the entire town would come out and fill the street just to hear me play. They even started giving me money just for playing this magnificent instrument. After a few months of this, a club manager caught wind of me and offered to organize a live performance at a local music club. I eagerly agreed, but before I was scheduled to play the show, I decided to pay a visit to the man who had given me the piano. Knocking on his door, I was greeted by a tearful wife. She told me that her husband had passed away. Shocked, I gave my condolences to the family. Heading back home on my bike, I noticed something even more terrifying. There was smoke rising from my block. Pedaling as fast as I could, my fears soon became a reality as my house was engulfed in flames. Without even hesitating, I threw open the garage door and wheeled out the piano into the grass. The fire department arrived and was immediately putting out the fire. I found myself wiping off the soot from the piano when the fire chief told me that both my parents were inside, and that they didn't make it. What was strange was that I knew I was sad. I even wanted to cry. But when I looked at that piano, I couldn't help but smile. I was just so thankful that I managed to save it. Unfortunately, I had to cancel my show at the local club, and I had to move in with some relatives a few states over. When I got there, I got in contact with a large music hall, and they allowed me a spot to play, but informed me that I wouldn't be the main event. As I was preparing to go on, I noticed a news segment covering my old town. Apparently, there had been a huge earthquake that ravaged the town. Scientists called it an act of God. I was glued to the screen as the reporters informed that the death toll was staggering. I felt sick. My mind was putting together pieces of a puzzle which made me doubt my playing. However, the thought that an inanimate object could cause a catastrophe like this was so far-fetched, I simply brushed it off. The entire show was sold out. And even though I wasn't who they came to see, I intended on providing the best show. The crowd was hushed, and through the silence, I finally began to play. After the show, the entire audience was awestruck. Money, jewelry, and women's clothes were tossed upon the stage. I returned the gestures with a bow and left the stage. Ironically, the audience diminished with my absence. Over the course of a week, a string of deaths started to plague this city. Accidents happened left and right. By week's end, hundreds of people passed away. Finally, I knew it. I knew that I was the cause of all these deaths, that the piano had to be cursed. I knew I had to make a choice, either give up playing or live with the guilt. Thousands of deaths are on my hands now, but playing is my addiction. Well, my next show is this weekend. Would any of you like to buy a ticket?